The first time I saw Lieutenant Kara Voss, she was bleeding green fluid all over my ship's cargo bay, and I knew my relatively peaceful life as a smuggler was about to get monumentally complicated. Let me back up. My name is Threll, and I'm what you'd call a Cortaxian freight runner. That's code for, I move things people don't want questions asked about. It pays well enough to keep my ship, the drifting comet, running smoothly through the outer sectors where the Hegemony's grip gets a little loose. Now, you need to understand something about humans. They're insane. Not the fun kind of insane where they just make poor financial decisions or drink too much fermented grain. No, no. These creatures are the kind of insane where they look at a problem that would make any rational species surrender immediately, shrug their weird fleshy shoulders, and say something like, "Hold my beverage." The war had been going badly for Earth. Actually, badly is generous. The Hegemony had crushed 17 species in the last cycle alone. Earth was supposed to fall in 3 standard weeks. Maximum. So naturally, when this human tumbled out of an escape pod that crashed through my cargo bay shields, covered in injuries that should have killed her twice over, still clutching some kind of sealed container to her chest like it contained the secrets of the universe itself, I knew I should have just opened the airlock and called it a day. But I didn't. Stupid? Probably. Profitable? We'll see. Don't touch the case, she gasped, her red blood mixing with the green coolant leaking from my damaged base systems. Humans are so dramatic. I wasn't planning on it, I said, all 4 of my eye stalks focusing on her with what I hoped looked like authority rather than panic. You're going to die if I don't get medical attention, you realize that, yes? Doesn't matter, she wheezed. The signal has to get through. Oh, wonderful. A martyr. Those are always fun at parties. I called my medical officer. Well, officer is generous. Blix is more of a guy who knows which end of a bandage goes on the wound type, but he's cheap and doesn't ask questions about why we're hauling Tellurian spice through Hegemony checkpoints. Captain, that's a human, Blix said when he arrived, his antenna quivering with what I've learned to recognize as his version of concern. Or possibly gas. Hard to tell with his species. Your observational skills remain unmatched, I replied dryly. Can you fix her or not? Fix? Captain, I don't even know where to start. They have internal skeletons. Internal? Who designs a species like that? Someone with a terrible sense of humor, I muttered. Just stop the leaking and keep her alive long enough to tell me why half the Hegemony fleet is probably about to show up at my coordinates. Because, oh yes, I'd checked the scanners. 3 Hegemony cruisers were burning hard toward our position, and they looked decidedly unfriendly. Blix got to work with his usual combination of competence and complaining. Meanwhile, I needed to figure out what to do with the universe's worst timing and a cargo hold that now contained a dying human and whatever she was protecting. Captain, my pilot Ven called over the comm, we've got company. Big company. Hegemony Command wants us to power down and prepare for boarding. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. Tell them we're experiencing engine troubles and need 15 minutes to comply. They're not going to believe that. I know. But it'll buy us time to think. The human, Kara Voss according to the name patch on her tattered uniform, grabbed my lower arm with surprising strength. Her species' grip is unnervingly powerful for creatures who look like they'd snap in a strong breeze. The case, she said, her voice steadier now. Whatever Blix had injected her with was working. It contains the final transmission codes from Earth's deep space network. Every resistance cell. Every hidden base. Every last human outpost scattered across 40 systems. I stared at her. All 4 eyes. You're telling me that container has the location of every surviving human in the galaxy? Not just locations, she said, and I swear she smiled. Humans show their teeth when they're happy. It's terrifying. Activation codes. Weapons caches. And the coordinates for Earth's last gambit. Earth's last what now? Can't tell you that part. Not yet. Oh, fantastic. Secrets within secrets. The Hegemony wants this information, I said slowly, my mind racing through terrible scenarios. If they board my ship and find you with that case, they'll kill everyone aboard and take it anyway, she finished. Yes. You could have led with that information. Would you have helped if I had? Honestly? Probably not. I stood up, all 6 of my limbs working to keep my balance as the ship shuddered. The Hegemony vessels were getting closer, their tractor beams already probing our hull. Then, I called over the comm, how fast can we jump? In our current state. Jump where, Captain? They've got our signature locked. Wherever we go, they'll follow. The human tried to sit up, failed, and settled for looking at me with those disturbingly focused forward-facing eyes. There's a way, she said. Oh, do tell. The Drift Nebula. It's 3 jumps from here. I actually laughed out loud. The Drift? That's a sensor-dead zone. Ships go in there and never come out. Exactly, she said. The Hegemony won't follow. Too risky. Too risky because it's basically a death trap. Better than definitely dying here. She had a point. Humans usually do, right before they convince you to do something monumentally stupid. I made the decision that would change my life forever. Then, plot a course for the Drift Nebula. Maximum speed. Captain, that's insane. I know. Do it anyway. The ship lurched as we broke free of the initial tractor beam lock. The Hegemony cruisers opened fire immediately. Not to destroy us, mind you. They wanted us intact. Which meant they really wanted what we had. Plasma fire raked across our shields. Alarms blared. Somewhere in engineering, I heard something expensive explode. Jumping in 30 seconds, Ven announced, his voice tight with stress. Kara Voss had somehow gotten to her feet, still clutching that case like her life depended on it. Which it probably did. When we get to the drift, she said, I need to transmit the signal. It's time sensitive. How time sensitive? Earth surrenders in 60 hours if they don't receive confirmation that the codes got through. 60 hours. That's barely enough time to. I know, she interrupted. That's why we can't fail. The jump drive engaged with a sound like reality tearing at the seams. The universe twisted, compressed, and snapped back. When the sensors cleared, we were floating in a nebula so thick with interference that I couldn't see my own wing tips on the scanners. Well, I said into the eerie silence. We're not dead yet. Yet being the operative word, Blix muttered, still working on his medical scanner. The human's internal injuries are severe. She needs real medical care within 12 hours or she'll start shutting down. Kara Voss just smiled that terrifying human smile again. Then I guess we better work fast. I looked around my ship. My crew was staring at me with expressions ranging from terror to resignation. We just made an enemy of the most powerful military force in the galaxy to protect a human carrying information that could change the course of the war. And we were trapped in a nebula that might kill us all before we ever got the chance to regret our decisions. Right, I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Someone explain to me exactly what we've gotten ourselves into, and more importantly, how we're supposed to transmit anything through this interference soup. The human looked at me with those intense eyes, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the start. She'd planned this. All of it. The drift isn't random interference, she explained. It's an ancient relay network. Dormant for thousands of years. But if you know the activation frequency, you can use it to broadcast through hegemony jamming, I finished. You clever, terrifying creature. We learn from the best, she said. Your species' old smuggling routes gave us the idea. I felt something like respect mixing with my ever-present survival instinct. Humans didn't just fight. They studied. They adapted. They turned their enemies' own tactics against them. Absolutely terrifying. All right, I said, making my second terrible decision of the day. Let's save your species. But if we survive this, you're paying for the repairs to my cargo bay. Kara Voss actually laughed. A sound like broken glass mixed with genuine amusement. Deal, she said. And that's how I, Frel the smuggler, accidentally became part of Earth's last desperate gambit to survive extinction. What could possibly go wrong? Everything, as it turned out. But that's a story for the next part of this increasingly complicated disaster. The ancient relay network turned out to be less network and more collection of half-functioning death traps scattered through a nebula that actively hates all forms of life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, we had to find the primary relay node. Which, according to Kara Voss and her mysteriously detailed intelligence, should be somewhere in the heart of the Drift Nebula. You know, the part where sensor interference gets so bad you might as well navigate by throwing dice and hoping for the best. 2 degrees starboard, Kara instructed from her position at my navigation console. Blix had patched her up enough that she could stand without leaving a trail of various fluids, which I considered a minor miracle. There's nothing on sensors, Ven complained, his manipulator appendages dancing across the controls. Just more interference and what might be space debris or might be my imminent demise. Hard to tell. Trust me, the human said. Those 2 words. Humans love those 2 words. Trust me. Right before everything explodes. But we followed her directions anyway, because at this point, what choice did we have? The Hegemony was undoubtedly setting up a blockade around the entire nebula perimeter. Going back wasn't an option unless we enjoyed the idea of interrogation followed by execution followed by our ship being sold for scrap. Captain, my engineer Ratch called from below decks. The interference is playing havoc with our systems. I'm having to manually reroute power every 30 seconds just to keep life support stable. Do your best, I replied, which is what you say when you have absolutely no solutions to offer. The drifting comet pushed deeper into the nebula. The view screen showed nothing but swirling clouds of ionized particles that looked uncomfortably like angry faces if you stared at them too long. I made a mental note to stop staring. There, Kara said suddenly, pointing at absolutely nothing I could see. The relay node. Dead ahead, 3,000 meters. I see nothing but clouds and my own approaching panic attack, I said flatly. It's shielded. Old technology. Pre-hegemony. The architects built these stations before they vanished. Ah yes. The architects. Every galaxy has legends about the mysterious ancient civilization that built impossible things and then disappeared without explanation. Personally, I think they looked around at the universe, said, "This is getting too complicated," and retired to another dimension entirely. Smart folks, the architects. As we approached the coordinates, something massive began to materialize through the interference. A structure so large it could have housed a small city. Curved spires of metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. That's not possible, Ven whispered. Nothing that old should still be intact. The architects built things to last, Kara said, and I detected a note of awe in her voice. Even dying humans could appreciate good engineering. Now we need to dock and upload the signal. Dock. With that thing? It's been abandoned for millennia. 43,000 years, give or take, she corrected. But the docking system should still respond to the activation codes. Should, I repeated. My favorite word in the entire galactic common language. But we approached anyway. Because apparently I'd left my survival instincts back in civilized space where they belonged. The docking procedure was surprisingly smooth. Too smooth. Which made me more nervous than if things had gone wrong. When ancient alien technology works perfectly, that usually means you've activated something you shouldn't have. The airlock cycled open with a hiss that sounded like it had been waiting 43,000 years to make itself heard. "I'm going in," Kara announced, grabbing her precious case. "Not alone you're not," I said, surprising myself. "If you die in there, I need to know where you hid the payment for this job." She gave me a look that suggested humans have a very specific expression for, "You're not fooling anyone with that excuse." But she didn't argue. We took Blix too, because someone needed to keep the human from bleeding out at an inconvenient moment. The interior of the relay station was exactly as unsettling as I'd expected. Corridors that seemed to shift perspective when you weren't looking directly at them. Lighting that came from everywhere and nowhere. And a persistent low hum that you felt in your bones rather than heard. "The control center should be at the core," Kara said, consulting a data pad that apparently contained architect station layouts. Where had Earth gotten that information? Questions for later. If there was a later. We walked for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. Time gets weird around architect technology. We passed chambers filled with equipment whose purpose I couldn't even begin to guess. Screens displaying symbols that predated every known language. And at one point, what I'm fairly certain was a warning sign, though what it was warning about remained unclear. Finally, we reached a massive circular chamber. The control center. And it was magnificent. Terrifying, but magnificent. Holographic displays flickered to life as we entered, responding to our presence. Or maybe to the case Kara carried. Data streams in languages nobody had spoken in thousands of years flowed across surfaces that might have been walls or might have been something else entirely. "This is it," Kara breathed. "The primary relay node. From here, I can broadcast through the entire Hegemony communication network. They won't be able to block it or trace it. Not from here." "And what exactly are you broadcasting?" I asked, because I was tired of secrets. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she opened the case. Inside wasn't some advanced piece of technology. It was simpler than that. A data core. Small. Unassuming. But according to the readings on my scanner, it contained more compressed information than should physically fit in that space. "Activation codes," she explained. "For every human resistance cell. But more than that. Earth didn't just scatter its people across the galaxy as refugees. We planned. We prepared. Hidden weapons. Sleeper ships. Resources cached in places the Hegemony would never think to look. You've been planning your own extinction defense for years," I said slowly. "Decades," she corrected. "The moment we made first contact and saw how the galaxy really worked, we knew this day would come. Every species that tried to stay independent got crushed. So we decided not to play by their rules. But broadcasting the locations, won't that tell the Hegemony where to strike?" Kara smiled again. That terrible, teeth-showing human smile. "That's exactly what we want them to think. See, the real message isn't the codes. It's what happens when they try to act on them." And suddenly I understood. You're not sending a signal to save your people. You're sending bait. Earth surrenders in 60 hours, she repeated her earlier statement. But surrender doesn't mean what the Hegemony thinks it means. When they move to occupy our revealed positions, they'll find surprises. Lots of surprises. And while they're dealing with that, the real resistance, the one whose locations aren't in this data core, activates. I stared at this human. This injured, bleeding, supposedly desperate human who had just admitted to orchestrating the most elaborate military deception I'd ever heard of. "Your species is absolutely insane," I said with something approaching admiration. "We prefer, creatively adaptive," she replied. "Now help me interface this core with the relay systems." The process took 15 minutes and required Blix to hold 3 different connectors simultaneously while Kara worked the architect controls like she'd been studying them her entire life. Maybe she had. Humans were thorough like that. The station hummed. Not the low background hum from before. This was different. Building. Growing. The entire structure was coming alive. Signal ready to transmit, Kara announced. Broadcasting in all frequencies. Quantum, subspace, hyperwave, and 3 forms of communication the hegemony doesn't even know exist yet. How long will it take? The transmission itself? 30 seconds. But the relay will amplify it across the galaxy for the next 6 hours. By the time the hegemony realizes what happened, every human cell will have received the codes and activated their protocols. And will be trapped here while they figure out where the signal came from, I pointed out. Actually, no, she said cheerfully. The architects built these stations with escape systems. We just have to reach the emergency transport before the hegemony fleet arrives. Before the what? As if summoned by my question, alarms started blaring. Not our ship's alarms. The station's alarms. 43,000-year-old alarms that still worked perfectly. They found us, Ven's voice crackled over my comm unit. Captain, we've got 12 hegemony warships dropping out of jump space at the nebula perimeter. They're scanning for our position. How did they track us through the interference? I demanded. Kara had the decency to look apologetic. They didn't track us. They tracked the relay activation. It's putting out enough energy to light up every sensor in 3 sectors. You knew this would happen. I suspected it might occur, she admitted. But the signal is transmitting. Nothing can stop it now. We just need to survive the next 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Sure. What's 20 minutes when you're being hunted by the most powerful military force in the galaxy inside an ancient space station that might decide to malfunction at any moment? Where's this emergency transport? I asked, already moving toward the exit. Sub-level 7, Section 12, according to the schematics. According to schematics that are 43,000 years old. Do you have a better plan? I did not have a better plan. We ran. Well, Blix and I ran. Kara did something between running and controlled falling that humans apparently call tactical movement. The station shook around us as the hegemony fleet began their assault. They weren't shooting at us specifically. They were shooting at the entire relay node, trying to destroy it before the transmission completed. Too late for that. But it meant we were inside a giant target. Left here, Kara gasped, her injuries clearly catching up with her. Down this shaft. The shaft was vertical. Of course it was. We climbed down through what I can only describe as controlled chaos. Explosions rocked the station. Systems that had worked perfectly moments ago began failing. Lights flickered. Gravity wavered. At one point I'm fairly certain physics itself took a brief vacation. But we made it. Sub-level 7, Section 12. The emergency transport was there. A small craft that looked like it had been designed by someone who had never seen a spaceship before but had heard them described inaccurately. It was oval. Smooth. And covered in symbols that probably meant something important. Will it even work? Blix asked, vocalizing all our thoughts. Only one way to find out, Kara said, slapping her hand on what might have been a control panel. The craft hummed to life. Lights activated. A hatch opened with a pneumatic hiss that sounded far too modern for something this ancient. We piled inside. The interior was surprisingly spacious and completely alien in design. Seats that adjusted automatically to our different body configurations. Controls that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch. Strap in, Kara advised, dropping into what I assumed was the pilot position. Architect emergency protocols are notoriously aggressive about safety. The craft launched. Not lifted off. Launched. Like being shot from a cannon while riding inside a particularly enthusiastic tornado. We blasted through the station's superstructure, through the nebula's interference, and into open space where 12 Hegemony warships immediately locked weapons on our position. "This is your plan?" I shouted over the roar of engines that shouldn't exist. "Not done yet," Kara replied, her hands dancing over controls. "The architects didn't just build relays. They built emergency escape routes. A portal opened in space ahead of us. Not a jump point. Something else. Something that made my eyes hurt and my sense of reality question its life choices. We plunged through. The universe turned inside out, did a backflip, and reassembled itself. When my vision cleared, we were floating in open space light years away from the nebula. Safe. Somehow impossibly safe. What just happened? I managed to ask. Architect Emergency Transport Network, Kara explained, looking entirely too pleased with herself for someone who was still bleeding in 3 places. Instantaneous travel between relay stations. The Hegemony doesn't know it exists. How does Earth know it exists? We've been exploring old architect sites for years. Reverse engineering their technology. Learning their secrets. The Hegemony thinks we're primitive because we're young. But we're also really good at learning from people who came before us. I sat back in my alien seat, processing everything that had just happened. So the signal got through. Your resistance cells are activating. The Hegemony is about to walk into your trap. What happens next? Kara looked at me with those forward-facing eyes, and I saw something in them that was somehow both terrifying and inspiring. Next, we fight. Not as a dying species making our last stand. But as humans doing what we do best. Adapting. Surviving. And teaching the galaxy that underestimating Earth was the Hegemony's first and last mistake. And what about us? What about my crew? She smiled. Not the terrifying teeth smile. Something softer. You helped save billions of lives, Threll. That makes you heroes whether you like it or not. Earth doesn't forget its friends. When this is over, you'll have a place with us. If you want it. I thought about my life as a smuggler. The constant running. The narrow escapes. The moral ambiguity of every job. Then I thought about what we just accomplished. Let's survive this war first, I said. Then we'll talk about retirement plans. Kara laughed. That broken glass sound that I was starting to find less terrifying and more genuine. The architect transport brought us to a human resistance outpost on the edge of civilized space. When we docked, we were met by dozens of humans. Soldiers. Engineers. Civilians. All of them looking at Kara like she just delivered salvation itself. Which, I suppose, she had. They carried her off to medical care. Real medical care that didn't involve Blix making his best guess at human anatomy. Before she left, she looked back at me. Thank you, Captain Threll. You could have turned me over to the Hegemony. Most would have. Most aren't as stupid as I am, I replied. Or maybe I just like backing the winning side. You really think we can win? I looked at the activity around me. Humans preparing for war. Not the desperate preparations of a dying species. The confident preparations of people who had planned for this moment and were ready to see it through. You carried Earth's final signal through enemy space, I said. Past impossible odds. Through ancient technology. While dying. If your entire species is half as stubborn as you are, the Hegemony doesn't stand a chance. She smiled one last time and was gone. I stood there in the docking bay of a human resistance station, surrounded by the most insane species I'd ever encountered, and realized something important. I just picked a side in a galactic war. Not for money. Not for survival. But because sometimes, just sometimes, the craziest option is the right one. Earth's surrender came and went. But it wasn't a surrender. It was a declaration. The hegemony learned that day what every bully eventually learns. Push someone hard enough, back them into a corner, threaten everything they love, and you don't get submission. You get humans. And humans, as I'd learned through personal experience, don't know when to quit. Which makes them either the galaxy's biggest fools or its most dangerous survivors. Probably both. Definitely both. And I just signed up to find out which. My name is Threll. I'm a Cortaxian freight runner turned accidental war hero. And this, somehow, was just the beginning.